For everyone with an interest in NASH or, more broadly, fatty liver disease, Surf's Up, Season 3, Episode 56 of Surfing the NASH Tsunami. Our discussion on nutrition and lifestyle, timed to coincide with Thanksgiving in the U.S., starts now.
This Thanksgiving week on Surfing the NASH Tsunami.
They asked me, why do I have to go to a dietitian for the rest of my life? And I say, it's like you go for a haircut. Every month or two, you go do your haircut. It's the same. It's part of your maintenance.
We deal with areas that require huge amounts of intense psychological support, and yet very few areas have access to a psychologist and a behavioural therapist. What we do need to do is look at more resources in the areas of hepatology for what we are now dealing with, which are highly addictive diseases.
We're going to live and die as an unfinished symphony. And following a diet is just the same thing. Don't aim for perfection, because that's the recipe for unhappiness.
I do see a clear window of opportunity to improve liver health here by adding diet and a liver-directed therapy, so I'm very optimistic this is really going to help.
The question isn't, can you never have a bad day? That's generally not possible. But after you've had one bad day, simply to not let it affect what you do going forward.
Every week, a global community of fatty liver disease stakeholders comes together to explore the most important challenges in diagnosing, treating, and developing medications for patients with fatty liver diseases. Join hepatology researcher and key opinion leader Professor Jörn Schattenberg, liver wellness advocate Louise Campbell, pricing and forecasting guru Roger Green, and today's guests, endocrinology researcher and key opinion leader Dr. Ken Cusi, and public health researcher, nutritionist, and key opinion leader Professor Shira Zelber-Sagi, as they discuss the role of nutrition management in treating NASH and NAFLD this week on Surfing the NASH Tsunami.
So we have only 4 people tonight, but we are on 4 different continents in 4 different time zones in really interesting locales. Louise is back after being away for a couple of weeks. Louise, how are you today, and how's life in Australia?
I'm very well, and it's very early morning in Perth, so just after midnight. So it's nice to be back. Nice to have listened to the last couple of episodes and not had to work.
Yeah, we've moved this podcast actually a couple of hours earlier today so that we could have Louise not on at 3 a.m, which would have been the other option, and also to allow Jörn, who is at a meeting in Copenhagen, to join us before he has to go off to his meeting dinner. Jörn, how are you today?
Thank you. I'm great. I can't believe I'm traveling again. I'm having a English breakfast tea here at 5:30 in the evening. I enjoyed the weekend at home. I think that's the good news.
That's fantastic. And then we have with us Shira Zelber-Sagi, who's never been on this podcast before. I don't believe we've managed to do this for 3 years and not have you on yet. Shira, how are you today?
I'm very good, and I'm so happy to be here finally.
Yeah, it's taken a while to do this. So where are you right now?
So I'm in Israel finally, after many travelings in the recent months, including the SLD. So it's good to be home, actually.
Excellent. And you know what? There will be a 5th joining us, because Ken Cusi is, he tells me, in the process of logging in right now. Now, when did you get home, Shira, from SLD?
Actually on Friday, not so long ago. So I'm still recovering from the jet lag, but it was worth it. It was a great place to be, a very interesting conference, and Washington is always amazing.
Yeah, Washington is a great city. So since you've not been on before, do us a favor, take a couple of minutes and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, the work you do, a little bit about that, and then we'll have a question for you after that. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I wear a couple of hats, actually. I'm originally a clinical dietitian. I have a degree in clinical nutrition, which I did in Israel, and then I continued to study epidemiology and preventive medicine in the Tel Aviv University School of Medicine, and then I jumped to PhD in direct course in epidemiology and preventive medicine. Actually, I always knew that I'm going to do research, so I just found a way to combine my love for nutrition and my love for science by studying nutritional epidemiology. And nowadays, I'm the Dean of School of Public Health at the University of Haifa. I've been there more than a decade, and in the past 3 years, I'm the head of the school. And it's just great that I have such a great job that I can combine all the things that I love to do. And with NAFLD, actually, I started studying NAFLD 22 years ago. When it really started to be an issue, there was a whole volume dedicated to NAFLD in seminars of liver disease, which was dedicated to NAFLD, the new so-called new disease. And my MPH mentor said, look, this is an interesting topic. And I took this and read it, and I just fell in love with it. And this is my research for the past 22 years. It's just unbelievable.
And she has done so, brilliantly, and really produced a number of high-ranked and highly cited papers, including ones in JHAP. And so Shira has really been tremendous contributions to the field, I have to say.
We have Ken with us now. Hey, Ken, how are you today?
Hello. How are you?
This is really a stellar group because when we talk about endocrinology and NAFLD, we talk about Ken, and when we talk about nutrition and NAFLD, you talk about Shira. And Jörn wears many hats brilliantly, and Louise does some really special things, and I'm just honored to be with all you guys. But as we get started, Shira, do us a favor, tell our audience one thing that they wouldn't know about you just from your professional history that's interesting.
It's not exactly my professional history, but I can tell you that I love three things. It would be dogs, chocolate, and people. Not necessarily in this order, but dogs I had most of my life. I usually collected them from the streets and brought them home as a child, and then I collected them from dog shelters. Chocolate, everybody who really knows me knows that I'm crazy about chocolate, and I always hide chocolate in my clinic and in my office, so my colleagues know that if they are hungry for some sugar, they know where to find it. And people, because I collect friends from all phases in my life, starting from elementary school and high school and university and military service. So I still meet friends that I met 40 years ago, and that's really nice.
That's fantastic. And I'm mindful of the idea that dogs and chocolate don't go well together, but all the other combinations are pretty perfect, aren't they? People and dogs, people and chocolate. At any rate, just to start, groundbreaker, one good thing that's happened in the past week, personal or professional. Brave one, go first.
Well, the good thing is I was at home for some time before taking off again, and we spent a lovely weekend in Cologne with friends, kids at the same age. Great time there.
And I suppose I'll jump in next. Good thing for me was catching up with old friends, having not been able to get to Perth since pre-pandemic. So making sure everybody was fine, seeing how they survived, although this was a state that didn't let anybody in but didn't really lock down. So it was not the worst place to have been on the planet, but it's nice to catch up with everybody.
I'll go. I had the pleasure to take my son to a trip abroad in Poland. He's 18, he's before his military service, and we got to have some very, very good time together. Good quality time.
Well, I'll tell you what this week is going to be. I'm leaving on Thursday to Argentina, Buenos Aires. I haven't been there where I have most of my family since COVID. So I haven't been there for like almost 3-4 years. And we're going to, all our family, have 3 kids. My daughter lives in New York. She's going to be heading there. And my son in Denver and her wife that just married earlier this year. And then we're going to have another big party with 120 people there Sunday night. So we're heading there to have a great time.
Lots of meat.
No. They eat a lot of meat. Definitely they do. But I've weaned myself since living here. I eat more. I am not vegetarian, but I eat more fish and stuff like that. But anyway.
So is there a lot of fish on the menu in Argentina?
There is. There's a lot of fish too. What happens is that the meat is super cheap. Cheaper than pasta, cheaper than veggie, cheaper than anything. A steak that's $10 in the U.S. is $1 there. So that's financial and also a culture for it.
And really great red wine. So it all goes together, right?
Great red wine with great meat and great bakery, good bread makes the combination explosive. But people walk a little bit more than in many places, are more physically active. So they keep their weight reasonable. And again, women are very European. They watch very much their weight. When I was an endocrinologist there, they would all come in tears. I gained 3 pounds and their BMI is still 25, but they're very upset about it. So women are in general very, at least in the cities, are very self-conscious about weight and stuff. But I've been lucky. My wife is also from Argentina, and what can I say? Very beautiful. And we've been happily married for 33 years, so we're gonna have a great time.
It's fantastic.
You're very lucky.
I am a very lucky man. Every day I count my blessings.
Fantastic.
And then I spend time with this hobby of fatty liver and medicine.
You and Shira really have that in common, being in professions that didn't necessarily have to pull you to fatty liver, but really did pull each of you there.
Yep.
Right.
We're going to resolve this thanks to hepatologists like Jörn and Louise with education and primary care. And a professional level was a great week last week. After several weeks of working on including fatty liver in the ADA guidelines. They're going to have a substantial revamping in January, and furthermore, there's going to be an additional section more in depth about it. This last 18 months have been great with the AGA update, multidisciplinary update, the ACE one for endocrinologists, the update by AASLD, and now the ADA. I think we've got a good platform to go out there and increase awareness.
And then with the OCA resubmission to FDA and the reveal on the resmetirom phase 3 data coming supposedly by the end of the fourth quarter, which is now only 5 or 6 weeks away, this all could feel very different in a couple of months than it does right now.
If everything goes right, it will, definitely. And if not, we'll keep working at it.
So my personal is really simple, my good thing, which is that we don't talk about this a ton on this podcast, but I love to cook and have had the good fortune to make small dinners for 3 different sets of friends in the last week and 2 or 3 more over the next 5 days. So I'm polishing off recipes I haven't used in 10 years, and all healthy, by the way, because my wife eats no red meat. So what I can't do is clear. But it's been a blast just looking at I cooked something for dinner last night I had made in 15 years. It was just more fun than I can tell you. With that, we're fortunate to have Shira on, who is, as Jörn points out, world-renowned around subjects of nutrition and NAFLD. And I basically suggested to Shira that she should just give us a tour of things that she thinks are most important. So pick one area where you'd like to start. We had talked about 3 last week. Pick any one of them. Take about 5 minutes, 7 minutes, and walk us through. And then I'm sure people will have questions because this is not a shy group.
Okay, I need now to pick one topic. It's very difficult. I would go first for weight reduction and how to achieve it. So we are all aware that weight reduction is the first-line treatment in NAFLD. We also know that it helps in a dose-response manner. We know that the more you reduce weight, the better you improve liver histology, and this is especially important for people with advanced liver disease. So if you just have steatosis and you reduce 5% then of your body weight, then it's great. You reduce the steatosis in most cases. If you have NASH, you need more like 7% weight reduction to get NASH resolution in most patients, although even lower weight reductions can be very helpful. But 7% is kind of a gold number where you want to go if you want to be sure that you have improvement. And then people with fibrosis, with more advanced NASH, should have around 7 to 10% weight reduction to have regression of fibrosis by at least one stage. So we all know that. But how do we achieve it? We all know it's a great challenge. And even if you manage to achieve this weight reduction, it is so difficult to maintain. So one challenge is the long-term adherence, to keep the long-term adherence for weight reduction and dietary modification. And another challenge is how to choose the right diet for the right patient. I would really love to get your opinion on that before I say my own opinion. I mean, how do you recommend the nutritional treatments to your patients? Do you all go for Mediterranean diet or let them choose the diet? Because now there's so many options. There is the Mediterranean, there is the low-fat, there is the intermittent fasting, there is the ketogenic diet. So what is your take on that?
Let me make 2 comments before I hand it off to Ken, who's obviously much more stringently working with diets. I have 2 things. I think hepatologists have 2 left hands with diet. They are not good at assessing their patients in terms of nutritional intake. They're also not great at recommending something. So I believe it should be straightforward and simple. And for that reason, I think I've said that before, I prefer to just tell patients to stick to simple regimens and, for example, do an intermittent fasting. I think this is something I would be capable of instead of commenting on reduction of certain nutrients. My other thought that I want to share with the group, and we can answer that after this, the big pushback I get, even if I talk to my colleagues, is why do you need drugs for this disease? They should just lose weight. And I'd like your thoughts on revisiting that. Ken, I think you heard that, maybe some years ago. How can we transfer that to hepatology?
Yeah, that's a good point. Ken, would you like to respond before me?
So number 1, endocrinologists have dietitians. You can give some little tips during our visits. In the United States, we have this terrible fee-for-service, so visits have to be done, follow-ups in 20 minutes, and that's not the right way to deliver the education you need for long-term success. So we have dietitians that work close by with us, or we give them appointment. Now, many times patients don't attend, But the importance of the doctor is to tell them how important it is to have diabetes education. So we, as doctors, are just the coaches. They are their own players in the game, and they're going to be making decisions 3 or 4 times a day. So we insist how important it is to get education, because that's the only thing. Second thing, just general things that you may all know, but maybe somebody in the audience could learn from. We've removed the idea about diet, because the diet has to be like a beginning and an ending, and we know what happens when you end a period of diet because they achieved a weight loss goal. So what we tell them is that this is about profound, long-term lifestyle changes, that, each time you're eating a hamburger, those saturated fat are damaging, sometimes irreversibly, your vessels, and that a way of loving yourself is putting good food into your body. And again, there's no secret. Everybody knows what junk food is. Everybody knows, of course, fat and sugar and is tasty. But we try to create a consciousness of long-term self-love and self-care. But it does require, it's been shown, it needs a structured weight loss program, and in general, along the lines of a Mediterranean diet. Of course, what the Obesity Society and weight management people, they allow what the patient choose. I mean, sometimes if they all for intermittent fasting, be it. But as long as this is an induction period, but that the long-term changes have to be those along a healthy Mediterranean style diet that has the best long-term evidence, and it's sustainable. Keto diets are not sustainable long-term, or a lot of the other intermittent diets. But if they want to do it and they're motivated, that's what they want to do, we're happy. Whatever you want to do. In the United States, the biggest problem is excess consumption of carbohydrates, particularly. So it's easy to cut sodas and cut the big offenders, but that usually is not enough. Now, the second thing is that except weight loss from bariatric surgery, that's 30% of excess body weight and so forth, diets that are going to be 5-10% without the support of some pharmacotherapy like GLP-1s have very erratic impact on fibrosis, in particular, and steatohepatitis. That's why I think that they have to be supported by ideally medications for weight loss like GLP-1s. There are other weight loss medications, but not being widely adopted with some side effects and have to be used by people who are familiar with them. But that's why you also need additional medications, and again, that's why I give pioglitazone to so many people, because within the frame of a weight loss management, you have a net weight loss, and it also improves steatohepatitis. And that's why when FDA drugs get approved that don't specifically promote weight loss, they should still add a medication that's specific for reversing steatohepatitis in addition to lifestyle, because even if medications maybe 50% reach a response, and with diet, lifestyle studies have shown, the better ones, that not everybody, actually a minority, reach a reversal of steatohepatitis or fibrosis. So depending on the weight loss, I think that they're not exclusive, and I think we should, like we do in diabetes or dyslipidemia, use medications and lifestyle change.
I agree with everything that's been said, but I'd also start even more simpler than that. You have to get somebody to see that they can make a change. So by giving them aims on diets, that could be too far ahead. They need to find something that works for them. They need to find something that's small. There's a saying in the UK that a cup of tea is an excuse for a biscuit. Actually, don't have your cup of tea every day. Jörn, I hope you didn't have a biscuit with that breakfast tea that you were having just then. So they have to see that what you're suggesting, even if it's to start just to see a change, that they can achieve it. One benefit that I have with fibre scanning people more regularly is that you'll be surprised how much a small change shows in the CAP score. Arguably, not necessarily the most accurate metric of fat, but it is a highly positive motivator for an individual. If they get that motivation, they can move on and see the next change, or change a few days. We can build up to changes. There is more and more evidence, and I'm sure Shira will discuss this, about the quality of diet, not only the weight loss being now more measurable. For me, I just want to get them to see that they can start and reinforce that. And we use a lot of stuff in the NHS, the NHS guidance and eat well plates. And yes, I've got patients who are obviously Mediterranean, but I've seen quite a few recently who are on the keto diet. And one of my questions later on that I'd like to know is there's mixed reviews for the keto diet in NAFLD. What is the basis for it working? How does it work? Is it better than or worse than some of the other diets? So those are questions that people ask, but I'm not a dietitian. Yes, I've done more nutritional courses recently, but I think quick wins gets the buy-in, and I think for me, I need to see the buy-in, and we get that in 8 to 9 out of 10 patients that we see, so that's good, and then they can go on for a formal diet.
So, Shira, my expertise on this is simply as a guy who's lost 100 pounds over the course of his life and finally figured out how to keep them all off, but I'm going to reserve comments and questions until I hear what you've got to say.
Actually, I agree with all of you. Thank you for these excellent inputs. And definitely, Ken, it's not about diet. It's about lifelong lifestyle modification, lifelong healthy habits. So you're absolutely right. It's much more than diet, and word diet is a bad one. And also, we need to remember that it's not all about weight. As also Louise mentioned, I will discuss several foods and food groups which are highly relevant to NAFLD later on, but it's not all about weight reduction. And in fact, my approach to the patients is called weight inclusive approach, but not a weight focused approach, meaning that it is not that the whole treatment is focused and measured only by weight reduction. Weight reduction is not the only success measure for lifestyle modification. So weight inclusive approach means eat healthy, exercise, do whatever you can, and every improvement in your lifestyle gets positive feedback. Everything is important, everything has an impact. And if you lose weight on the way, that's great, but it's not the only goal of the treatment, because many patients focus just on weight reduction, and if they don't lose weight or if they don't lose weight as much as they would expect, they get really disappointed. That is the thing that usually breaks the diet, that it makes them stop doing the diet, and that's really a pity because it doesn't have to be that way. And that brings me to the point of goal setting. It is really, really important with the patients to have very realistic goal setting. So we can discuss 5 to 10% weight reduction, but sometimes they want to reduce 20%, or they want to get back to the weight which they were at the age of 18. And we need to make it clear that it has to be a realistic goal in terms of weight reduction. And again, weight reduction is not the only way to measure success. And as Louise said, using tests, different tests, imaging, blood tests, to show them that even modest changes in lifestyle have a stronger effect on NAFLD is extremely important, and from my experience leads to a lot of motivation. Now, the role of physicians, as Ken said, is not exactly to provide the exact dietary treatment, but the main role, which has been demonstrated also in studies, is to explain to the patients the importance of NAFLD, to explain that it is reversible by diet. This is a reversible disease. They can reverse it. It is with their own power to reverse the disease by doing lifestyle modification, and to create the motivation of the patients to actually go to professionals and have this lifestyle modification treatment. If we want this treatment to be good in the long term, to be long lasting, then the patients need to know it's a lifelong treatment, and they need to be in constant contact with a dietitian or nutritional expert for lifelong. So they ask me, why do I have to go to a dietitian for the rest of my life? And I say, it's like you go for a haircut. Every month or two, you go do your haircut. It's the same. It's part of your maintenance. As for the specific type of diet, which kind of diet should we choose? So you already mentioned it. Actually, I always negotiate the type of diet with the patients. First of all, I want to hear from them. What are the foods that they like? What are the foods that they feel that they are willing to give up? And we have kind of a negotiation, and I try to see which kind of person stands in front of me, and then to tailor the diet to the patient. Because studies show that actually most diets are beneficial. So we know Mediterranean diet is absolutely the most evidence-based, beneficial diet, very healthy, also in terms of dietary composition and prevention of cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. Of course, it's true. But also low-fat diet is okay. And also intermittent fasting is fine. There are many patients that find it more convenient to know that they can eat like 8 hours a day and then not to eat the rest of the day. It's a black of white kind of people. They need to know that when they can eat and when they cannot eat, and it's much easier for them, and it works for many of my patients. So as long as they eat healthy food within these 8 hours, then it's fine with me. I mean, they can't have sugar and saturated fat all day, but they can have healthy diet without counting calories within 8 hours and then do the intermittent fasting, and it works fine. And there are a few studies in NAFLD showing that it is equally beneficial as other types of diet, diet, for example, low-carb diet, which is also an option. By the way, low-fat and low-carb diet are equally beneficial in NAFLD, so the patients actually can choose whatever they like. If it is a person that likes more protein and fat, he can go for the low-carb diet. It's not a problem. But if he likes bread and must have bread because otherwise he feels headaches and exhausted, he can have the usual low-fat diet or Mediterranean diet. So it's really about the patient to choose the type of diet. It's a long discussion and a long negotiation with the patient to decide. And always we can switch between the diets, of course. As for keto diet that you asked, Louise, there is very little evidence in NAFLD, but of course it's possible. It's a very difficult diet to maintain in the long term, let's face it. Not having carbohydrates is really tough. But if a patient chooses this diet, it's possible, but it needs to be carefully supervised, medically supervised, because it's still a very radical diet.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the questions, because the patient got sent to me because the ELF test had risen, and in fact the FibroScan confirmed the high ELF and a lot of fat. So I think they're going back for a review of the diet, and although they like it, it might just need to be altered, I suspect.
Shira, I heard a couple of things that I want to reflect and maybe get a quick answer on before moving on in the discussion. I heard biofeedback. I think that is very important. Louise mentioned ultrasound, transcendental elastography. I think this is great. Is this at times of apps and medications, adherence through mobile phones and stuff, is this really the game changer in your assessment, or is this just another way to be reminded, or is it a useful addition? Like, how can phones, or if you record something, how can that help our patients?
I think it's very important to have as much feedback as you can. I think patients are really looking forward to it, and I think it really increases their motivation. So it can be a test, as Louise mentioned and I mentioned, and we do try to look at liver enzymes, for example, every 6 months, and imaging, let's say, once a year to get this feedback. But also, if you can have another feedback by the apps, for example, if you keep your diet, it gives you your dietary composition and it shows you it's a very good diet, or if you do enough steps or kind of a physical activity and you get a positive feedback. So positive feedback is really important. I would go for the positive feedback and not for the negative feedback to create motivation. I think that also us as physicians and dietitians, all the multidisciplinary team, there's no replacement for the personal positive feedback. So we all need to remember that every time that a patient arrives and tells us about any change that he made, we should congratulate him on making this change, even if it's a small one. And another issue is how the patient feels. Many patients, when they eat healthier diet, exercise, they feel better. They feel more energy. They feel that the quality of life improved for them. And I think we need also to focus a lot on this feedback, on patient-reported outcomes, on letting them tell us how the dietary modification, lifestyle modification improve their quality of life. And you would be surprised because I hear amazing things about it. I have the liver clinic at the hospital. I work there for the past 22 years. And I have patients who know me and which I treat for 22 years, the same patients. This is why I love this clinic so much. And what is always amazing to me is, first of all, the long-term adherence. So it's not like a perfect adherence, and obviously in between there are relapses in the diet, of course, and sometimes they don't arrive to visits, but generally these patients, and many of them, I follow for about 10, 20 years. And it's always amazing to see how dietary treatment, if they keep it, really leads to amazing regression in fibrosis and steatosis. And on the other hand, some patients just don't make it. And then I know them for 20 years. They had NAFLD and now they are cirrhotic patients, which still need dietary treatment. But it's amazing when you have this long-term follow-up and you see the different disease course of the patients, of course, and the very special and personal relationship you develop with these patients.
That all makes sense. I'm mindful of the things you said that made the most sense to me. The most important one is that I don't think people can keep weight off if they're not eating food they like. I've learned in my own experience, I am either an N of 1 because it's me, or an N of 4 because it took me 4 tries to get this right. That the most important things were A, to eat food I enjoyed, and B, to remind myself that everybody has bad days. And the question isn't, can you never have a bad day? That's generally not possible. But after you've had one bad day simply to not let it affect what you do going forward. Neither say, I need to starve myself now to make up for it, nor to say, oh, now I've blown it, but just to stay on the path I'm on and understand that my body self-corrects over time. And that's kind of how I've lived for the last probably 20 years, that I've had this more or less under control.
I completely agree with you, Roger. In fact, I tell the patients, in terms of goal setting, by the way, I also tell them, it's not a question if you would have a relapse. It's obvious that at some point you will have a relapse, and that's fine. It's part of the process. So having a relapse doesn't mean that you failed the process, that you need to end it, that you need to be disappointed from yourself. It's part of the process. No question you will have this relapse. The thing is not to look at it as a relapse, but to think of it as a small bump on the road. So there was a bump, and then you just lift yourself up and continue exactly where you stopped. No punishments, no low self-esteem, how it happened to me, and so on. Just lift yourself up and go back to the point where you had this bump on the road and continue with the process. So this is part of the expectations that we talk about with the patients at the beginning of the process. And yes, it's very, very challenging. I also tell them to learn. From every bump on the road, you can learn something and maybe do better for next time. So always use, every difficulty can be used for learning.
Yeah, those are good points that Shira makes. I mean, again, as a clinician, it's been said many times, it's a journey. For if I have a business-minded person, it's like the stock market, you know, probably Apple and Amazon are the greatest successful companies, at least from an earnings perspective, and they have ups and downs, and it's part of, in terms of diet, it's times of it's like human nature. There's a person very famous now called Brené Brown, talks a lot about vulnerability. We are prone to errors. We're never exactly the ideal image that we want to have of ourselves. We always fall a little bit short, particularly we have so many multiple roles and things. It's just difficult balancing act, and just remember we're going to outlive and die as an unfinished symphony, and following a diet is just the same thing. As I tell, if you get most of your choices right, you're going to lose weight and probably you're going to be happy in life, but you don't aim for perfection because that's the recipe for unhappiness.
Completely agree, and that's why I tell patients that I'm crazy about chocolate, for example, and that I would never give up chocolate. So we're all imperfect and it's fine. You just need to find the right balance for you.
And again, wasting energy and blaming yourself for feeling guilty. We have a limited amount of energy when we wake up every day. So, okay, be a little bit angry, okay. But as Shira said, learn from it. And again, if chips is your weakness, just don't buy them. Or just put in your plate how much you're allowed to eat today. And period. So use little tricks thinking of what went wrong to avoid it. Not to never happen again, but to minimize the times that it happens.
You know, Ken, the thing with food, bringing food at home is a very interesting issue. We always say don't bring enemies into your house, right?
Right, don't sleep with the enemy.
Yeah, so so don't bring the chips and the chocolate and the ice cream. This is actually taken from psychology. This is called stimulus control. Well, you want as alcoholic person to keep alcohol in the house and just be strong and don't touch it, right? Or someone who tries to quit smoking wouldn't keep cigarettes in his house. So it's the same with diet. You do stimulus control.
And it's everybody's, I mean, every day I'm just always struggling. I'm always hungry. I would eat twice of what I eat. People see it at work. I eat very little lunch here for a number of reasons. When I don't buy a lot of delicious things that I see at the supermarket because I'm going to gain weight. And actually, I've been trying to lose some weight lately because whenever I begin gaining some weight, I rapidly do get some intense measures to not do more exercise or even more hungry to try to balance it out before it gets out of control. So it's everybody's fight. I mean, everybody everywhere that's above age 21 has to be careful with what they eat.
You mentioned alcohol and smoking. I think diet is always a little bit more forgiving. So the consequences are slower. You know, you can gain weight fast, but I think, patients drinking alcohol, they decompensate. And I feel with diet, the biofeedback is not as rapid, maybe I'm wrong. And it's part of everyday life. So it's might be even tougher.
You can't quit eating, right? You can quit smoking and alcohol, but it's not a black and white. You can't quit eating. So that's why diet is, I think, far more difficult to manage. In terms of damage with cigarettes and alcohol, it's also slow long-term damage, but quitting may be easier because it might be a black and white issue, and while we all have to keep eating. And just imagine that NAFLD patients need to do diet and also can't have much alcohol. And also smoking is unhealthy for them. We need to remember that both very modest alcohol consumption is bad for NAFLD patients, especially those with fibrosis, right? It increases the risk of fibrosis progression, it increases the risk of hepatocellular carcinoma, and also smoking increases the risk of fibrosis and ACC. So our patients really have to give up on many pleasures.
I think it brings us back, or it brings us to the point that we deal with, as hepatology and liver disease, we deal with areas that require huge amounts of intense psychological support, and yet very few areas have access to a psychologist and a behavioural therapist. We get addictive therapies, but all of these are addictions and they're part of life. We are human, as we've said, and we're not perfect, but what we do need to do is look at more resources in the areas of hepatology for what we are now dealing with, which are highly addictive diseases, socioeconomic areas where you get worse advertising. Robert Mitchell-Thane described it, it's a war. So Ken, you have a dietitian. We didn't have a dietitian in hepatology at Imperial. We did at King's. So it is very hit and miss, the levels of support that we're able to offer our patients. Yes, I'm mental health trained. I can offer a little bit more insight, but I'm not an addiction specialist, for example. So we try to make those little inroads and keep the motivation, rewarding the positive, but for every 2 steps forward there might be a little step backwards. The whole thing that you've been talking about, we do need more investment to support these patients throughout, and a better recognition of psychological and support that they need.
Yeah, I would encourage doctors to work closer with that dietitian and really highlight this, that just telling them to lose some weight and a couple of tips usually doesn't cut it. The problem in the United States, I'm very impressed that Shira has patients for 20 years. Here, dietitians, are a couple of years, move on to somewhere else. Half the insurance don't pay for the dietitians. It's or live far away, and lower income people don't have the means to go and just leave their job. So in the United States, it is really a struggle to deliver good care, and many times they're also busy and don't have the time to do it. I think it's the job of the clinicians to build these teams and work in a way that they can serve their patients better. But we have to really ask anybody involved in the insurance company industry in the United States to really do the right thing and be more responsible in offering people what they really need and not think always in cost saving.
Ken, do you think that's going to change if Oka and resmetirom and all of the other medications come and get approved, that access to dietitians to lose the 3 to 7% weight loss, which is easier to lose further upstream if you find a poor healthy liver, do you think that becomes more then cost effective for insurance companies to put in?
Well, to be honest, with the Obesity Society, all of the societies related to nutrition, obesity, diabetes have had many meetings with the leaderships of insurance companies in the United States, and they never really take it seriously. They see it as an expense. They see it that, people hop from one insurance to another in 2 years. Why should I spend this up front? And usually they have few dietitians for 70% of Americans that are overweight or obese. Neither insurance company nor the state or the federal government have taken obesity with the seriousness that it has. We invest in many other things, and I don't want to do politics, but definitely the United States is not investing, and many other countries are not investing or making health a top priority.
Ken and Shira, particularly, to what degree do we think that apps on phones or on computer desktops can cover some of that space that isn't being picked up because we don't have enough dietitian or enough nutrition support?
I think it can be a helpful tool, another tool, but I don't think it can completely replace the human contact. So I think you do need a dietitian at least every couple of months to follow you. There is still the impact of the personal contacts, but I do think that some kind of apps can be helpful. But we need to remember that in older populations, it can be more difficult to use these apps, and maybe in less educated populations, it could be less available, or people from lower socioeconomic parts of the society. So these apps and computers could be very nice, but just not for everyone, and not as the only tool, in my opinion, just as another tool that can be used in addition to the personal contacts. And also the topic that we discussed a minute ago, the fact that people cannot reach a dietitian, that it's not covered by their health insurance, it's really important because it actually increases the health inequalities in liver disease. And there are many studies showing that food insecurity is related with NAFLD and more advanced fibrosis, and that people from low socioeconomic status and less affluent and children from less affluent families eat less fruits and vegetables and drink more soft drinks and suffer more from NAFLD. So it's amazing that these populations that needs dietitian consultation the most are the least to be able to actually get it. So I don't think we can solve it with apps, but maybe it can be some kind of help.
Yeah, I like Shira as an optimist. If any patient in the audience is using an app and it's helping, definitely that's a great support. In general, apps have shown that they get some feedback. People get excited the first few months, and then they drop out after 6 months or so, the excitement. And again, nobody can replace the human interaction and the human feedback. I mean, psychotherapists, as nutritionists, that chemistry is what really cures the patient. I'm sure if I had a dietitian like Shira to send my patients, I mean, we would have resolved NASH in the United States long ago. And it also works the other way around. I mean, sometimes the dietitian just hands them paper and information, but there's very little compassion, if you want to put it in a way. They come to me angry, I just wasted my time, I could have gone to the internet to get all this stuff. So the human factor is not replaceable. But you have a good point, Ab. I mean, Roger, could it help? Yes, but I don't think it's going to be decisive in turning the tide.
So in the end, it comes down to multiple aspects. And, Shira called for the repetitive haircut type of dietitian advice. I think I'm going to pick this up for my clinic too. I agree with Ken that the interaction at a human level, looking in the eye and focusing on the clinician or the dietitian is not replaceable by any tools. But as with other things we've discussed, I think there are many puzzles that can be put together. It's just not one straight shot and not so easy in the first round.
I want to bring up something. As physicians, when you meet the patients, so you can't do really behavioral therapy. You can't start because you don't have time for it. The time that I devote to the patients in the hospital clinic, it's about 30 to 40 minutes per visit. Okay, it's a lot of time. Discussing nutrition and behavioral therapy, it's really time consuming, so you can't do that. But I think that you can create the motivation, as I mentioned previously, for the lifestyle modification. And another thing is to discuss simple things with the patient. For example, to discuss with them certain foods that they should avoid as much as possible, right? No 100%, but as much as possible. So that's something that can be done even in 10 minutes physician's visit, like explaining that the worst thing they can have is sugared beverages. There are so many studies showing the damage of sugared beverages in NAFLD, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, obesity. If you devote just a few minutes to put a lot of emphasis on soft drinks, on sugar beverages, and then maybe on processed food, on ultra-processed food and processed meat, I think as a start, in a very short visit, that could have some impact.
Shira, can I ask, do you see members of the family as well, or is it just the patient when you do your consultation?
I always encourage the patients to bring family members. I do see a lot of them.
The reason I ask is what we see in alcohol, and I've seen it with diet, is sabotage by the person who cares for that, because there is a relationship between those people, particularly in alcohol. If you change the dynamic of the person who's dependent, you change the style of relationship that they have with their partner. Now that puts that as a threat. And if you are the partner who is controlling the purchase of the alcohol, the food, by putting putting it in the house. The sabotage comes in because you lose your power. And how much does that interfere or prevent people? And how much time do you get to even spend on that type of sabotage that goes on?
So I do get to see this sabotage from time to time. It's not very common, I must say, because most family members are quite worried about the liver disease of their family member, and they do try to change the food in the house and so on. But there are indeed cases where the spouse or even parents or even grandparents sabotage the treatment, and then you need to very quickly recognize that and not to involve this family member, or to have a discussion with him and to explain to him the implications of this sabotage. But I must say it's not very common, but yes, I do know what you mean, and I see it from time to time. The amazing thing is that I saw it a couple of times with adolescents or children, where the parents bring them for treatment, but then the grandparents think that preventing sugar beverages and sweets from the grandchildren is very cruel, and they actually sabotage the treatment. So then, of course, you have to have a very long discussion with the whole family.
Shira reminded me that diet is every day, and this is true for everybody, but in our patients that are suffering from diet-related lifestyle diseases, it's crucial that we take it serious. After hearing and listening to us, I also think it's not the sole solution to go for diet. Ken mentioned this early on, to add on medical therapy, and I do see a clear window of opportunity to improve liver health here by adding diet and a liver-directed therapy, so I'm very optimistic this is really going to help, and it's an adjunct in my understanding.
Jörn, my own experience, I think, would support that, and that of a lot of what we hear on the podcast. Happily, in my case, it was cholesterol and cholesterol meds, but you can only do so much with the diet anyway, right? So, Shira, the question that goes along with that is, if people ask too much of their diets, that's likely not to work. How do you help them be realistic in their expectations?
Well, I ask the patient very carefully what he eats and what are his favorite foods and what he can give up. What are the things that he can start with? So let's say if a patient drinks a lot of cola, he also doesn't have a very healthy diet, but let's say he drinks a large bottle of soft drinks a day. So the change can be very small. You can't change the diet in one day. So it can be like, you know what, until the next visit, just try not to drink soft drinks. We won't change the diet at that point, but just try not to drink soft drinks. So my point is that we go step by step, and we always see what the patient is capable to maintain and what is really difficult for him to maintain. We discuss it, we negotiate on it, and we find the way in the middle, because just saying don't eat this and that, it's 100% never touch these foods, it's impossible, and it's not going to work. And let's be honest, none of us is perfect. We all eat and drink things that we shouldn't. It's only a matter of balance. So it's finding the right balance tailored to the patient's specific needs and preferences. I think this is the issue. Now, we need to remember that we live in a very obesogenic environment. We are surrounded by ultra-processed food and drinks. In fact, more than 50% of the calories in Western countries come from ultra-processed foods, in Europe as well as in the United States. So it is very difficult to expect that the patient would keep the diet when he is surrounded by so many temptations. Almost all the food we buy is ultra-processed food, rich in saturated fat, which is unhealthy, sugar and other compounds. So we need to work very hard with the patients to explain to him that it's good to get back to the basics, to eat as less processed food as he can, not 100% not to eat it, but just less. Go back to the basic, to the home cooking, to the basic natural food. That can be really good starting points, I think. And also, of course, we have the responsibility to help change the environment, to make the environment healthier. I think this is our responsibility as clinicians. We don't only treat the patients, we also need to work on aspects of policy and trying to improve the environment to make the healthier choices the easier choices.
This is a group where everybody in this group, I think, does that. I know you do, Shira. I know Ken does. I know Louise does. I know Jörn does. So being involved with policy is part of the issue. I think that's really helpful.
I just think it's fantastic listening to those little snippets of advice that only take seconds in a clinic but can make a big change. And I think it is slow and steady. It's a marathon, not a sprint. That becomes achievable. I do have the advantage. I see people with poor liver health because they choose to have a liver check rather than somebody who necessarily needs to develop disease, and They way more buy into, well, if I've got this, why wouldn't I want to make that change? But if they make a change in their home, they make a change for their children too. Because if you remove those sugar drinks, you improve the next generation. My biggest fun fact, Shira will probably say this is wrong, but for a packet of crisps, or chips as you call them in the US, it's never been a children's portion. It's always been an adult portion. Now they supersize them, but 25 grams of potatoes, they stuff 4 kilos worth of potatoes fat into one packet of chips. And that really makes everybody laugh.
That's right. The top of my list of things that people don't know how bad they are sugar-saturated drinks and crisps or chips, as you would say. There is no other fast food that I can think of that is, well, maybe pork rinds in the South.
Oh, I don't know. Stephen's deep-fried turkey sounds like it could be competing.
Yeah, but you don't eat that every day, thank goodness. If a friend who was a frontline physician asked you what one thing you heard in the last hour from Shira or any of the rest of us that they can adopt immediately that will have an impact on how patients hear them or patients behave, what's the one thing you'd pick up on?
I learned a lot from Shira, Louise, who do this more often. One thing that comes, the bottom line is this is really all about our relationship with food, and not only us as adults, but most of the people who struggle with weight have children. I mean, children don't listen to what we say so much as they look at what we do. So if you want to have a healthy child, the greatest gift that you can do them, among other than love, of course, is to put them on a path of health for the future. And learning to eat, or your effort for eating right, even sometimes your failures, all teach kids that this is a lifelong journey with food, self-love, self-esteem, and caring. So I think there's a lot to learn from our struggle with food that can be translated to other aspects of life in terms of being forgiving with ourselves, doing good choices, accepting some poor choices, but that this is going to be something that is going to be a struggle until our last breath. So accept it and just do the work, and don't get discouraged by temporary failures. We're not always at our best, but the thing is your long-term determination to be successful in what you want.
I'm going to leave Shira the last word, so I'm going to say the term weight inclusive. I'm doing a lecture next week on lifestyle and poor liver health rather than liver disease, and it's your superhero organ, so I am going to use the term weight inclusivity.
I'm honored.
That's good.
It's a beautiful term, and it is so right, because it's not stigmatizing, it's part of that journey. It's a beautiful term. Thank you.
I will leave you the last word. I think your haircut metaphor, I agree with Jörn, was extremely helpful. It's not the way I've been inclined to think about this, number one. And number two, you didn't exactly say this, but you've been nibbling around it a lot, which is the idea that a partial success should be defined as a success.
Right.
You know, don't look at what you haven't done. Look at how much better you've done what you're doing.
Right. Absolutely.
I think that's huge, because people tend not to do that.
Thank you so much. You took such nice ideas for the summary. With the haircut, yes, it's a lifelong treatment. We just need to explain that it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. You take care of yourself. It's part of your maintenance. And weight-focused approach is really, you can find also Louise literature about it. In the treatment of obesity, it's a very, very nice attitude. And as with regard to what Ken said, I completely agree. I use a lot the issue of the next generation. I talk with my patients about their children and the risk also to have fatty liver. Therefore, the benefit they might have from changing the type of food they bring and buy to the house and cook at the house. And most importantly, I would like to end up with the term self-efficacy. We all need to work together, physicians and dietitians and nurses, to improve the patient's self-efficacy. The biggest problem is to convince them. The most difficult thing is to convince them in their ability to keep up a healthy lifestyle. So by improving their self-efficacy, by positive feedback, and as you said, Roger, we don't need to be perfect. None of us is perfect. So if you're okay 70% of the time, it's fine. It's a good thing. So if we use this approach, we actually increase the patient's self-efficacy, and I think this is really important for a successful lifestyle modification.
Shira, I think all this is great, and it's been worth the amount of time it's taken to get you actually onto this podcast to be able to share all this with people. So thank you so much for coming and joining. We'll do this again sometime and maybe bring in a couple of other folks to get their questions and comments as well. But this has just been, I think, a great hour. But thank you so much for joining. And
thank you. Thank you. It was such a pleasure.
Ken, enjoy Argentina. Louise, get some rest. It must be like 2 a.m. in Perth right now or something like that. And we will be back next week, actually, with Veronica Miller from the Liver Forum, talking about some of what they've been up to. I'm terribly excited about that episode. I've worked on that, Shira, for about as long as we've worked on this. So this will be 2 weeks in a row. We've got to do something that's been the result of a lot of time and a lot of energy. Thank you so much, everybody. I'll be back, Business Report, in a couple of minutes. Ken, Louise, Shira, Jörn in absentia. Bye-bye now.
And now for the Season 3, Episode 56 Business Report.
Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava, glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes. Sometimes it feels as if every step forward in this war is followed by a smaller step back, or maybe it's 2 up and 1 back. I join my friends and fellow Americans in commending the incredible courage and commitment of the Ukrainian people and hope that they persevere and do okay in the winter ahead.
There is something very American about this week's episode.
Over time, we've become an increasingly global podcast. Our co-hosts are from the UK or Australia, depending upon where Louise is on a given month, and Germany. And our daily pod status top 250 listings come from 8 to 15 different countries, but never the U.S. Now, that said, we've timed this week's episode on nutrition to coincide with Thanksgiving in the U.S., which is our largest audience. The day on which the average American eats multiple courses of fat, starch, and sugar with little redeeming nutrition. The Calorie Control Council in the U.S. estimates that we consume an average of 3,000 to 4,500 calories at the Thanksgiving meal alone, perhaps 5,500 for the day. Ren Kitchens goes further, estimating 6,300 calories if you include 3 beers and a full helping of Thanksgiving desserts. By the way, the desserts themselves can easily add 2,000 calories to the day. I mention all this to note that a Thanksgiving nutrition episode may become a NASH Tsunami staple, and also to remind all those who overeat or have patients who overeat that the most important thing to do is get back to normal the next day instead of starving yourself for 2 days to balance it out. Of course, the best strategy is probably to decide which one-starch course and dessert suit you best, which can cut 1/3 to 1/2 of your calories out of the meal in the first place.
Next week starts our sprint to the end of 2022.
After this week, we have only 3 live episodes left in 2022, followed by our regular end-of-the-year roundup interviews with some of our favorite leaders in liver medicine and advocacy. Next week, I'm excited to remind you that we'll have our first ever episode with Veronica Miller of the Liver Forum. The Liver Forum is a key player in supporting innovation and insight around drug and diagnostic development for liver disease, but not that many people know very much about it. This will be our first visit with Veronica, joined by our first episode in a while with Manal Abdelmalek, who made the necessary introductions to make this happen in the first place. This should really be special, and it's something we anticipate doing 2, 3, 4 times in the year going forward. Be sure to join us. The last 2 episodes of the year will include at least 1 preview episode for NASH Tag, which should be a fantastic meeting from January 5th to 7th, 2023. It's not exactly clear yet who besides Stephen Harrison will join us for this episode, but NASH Tag 23 promises to be a seminal moment in the history of Nashville, and you won't want to miss this one either. If we can preview NASH Tag in just a single episode, and that's questionable. The other episode will cover one of the major journal-published NASH stories of the 4th quarter of this year, and next week I'll have more to say about that as well.
This week's Vault episode looks back a year to our discussions about cirrhosis clinical trials.
A year ago, we used Vlad Ratsiu's presentation of the REVERSE study at AASLD 2021 as a jumping-off point to discuss the value of cirrhosis trials and getting drugs to approval without the conditional endpoints, that is biopsy, that have bedeviled all of us for years. At the end of the episode, we wound up briefly in a discussion about should we call this disease cirrhosis or something else. Given a year later that REVERSE has failed to separate and nomenclature debates have become prevalent, I thought it would be interesting to take a listen to the final conversation from the cirrhosis episode, Season 2, Episode 58.3, which was a year ago this week. It incorporates pieces of all this. Terns Pharma CEO Sen Sundaram coming on to ask whether the name cirrhosis is helpful, then some discussion about where REVERSE might lead to, and then finally talk about other ongoing cirrhosis trials led by Stephen Harrison. It's pretty revealing to look back on this episode from 1 year later and see what's taken different turns. So take a listen. And with that, I'm off. Thanks to the crew, Jake, Magic Mike, Eric, Steve, pushing this episode out. I hope they and all of you have a happy but not overly gourmand Thanksgiving, and we'll see you all with Veronica, Matt, and Manal next week. Until then, stay safe, surf on. We'll see you on the podcast. Happy Thanksgiving, and bye-bye now.
Have any questions for the surfers? You can send them to surfingnash.com, and we will answer on the podcast or the website.